All right, everyone. Welcome back to another Ace the Case interview video. This one from CasePrepHQ. This one about analyzing and interpreting data using a real BCG interview case. So before we start, once again, who are CasePrepHQ? It's basically a online Slack community with a whole bunch of free videos and resources to help you guys ace consulting case interviews, started by myself and a couple of friends. We're all ex-MBB, McKinsey, Bain, BCG consultants. I'm from BCG, or former BCG. Went on to do a product management role at a online marketplace startup named Redbubble. And then now doing a head of strategy role at a online logistics company named Fulfillio. You might also hear from my colleague, Jack. He's a former BCG consultant and then has since then spent time in strategy teams at Uber and now Google as well. So if you're interested, of course, jump onto CasePrepHQ, join our Slack community where there's, heaps and heaps of resources underneath there. And also the more important part, there's a community there to discuss any questions you've got with the videos, and of course myself and Jack are there, so you can ask questions there and get some help and find case prep partners. Because I remember when I was kind of interviewing, having the resources is one thing, but the bigger thing is actually being able to have someone explain, the questions you have to you, or even just practice with you. We can tell you guys how to interview well, but in the end, it's practice, practice, practice as well. So in this video, it's one of many in the Ace the Case series, where we're breaking down the steps needed to interview well in any case, from opening all the way to analyzing and closing. So in this video, I'll explain what the interviewer is looking for when they give you some data to analyze, which is typically in the middle of the case. They'll probably do it a couple of times as well, 2 or 3 times. And then also explain the method that you should take to kind of analyze data with your interviewer so that you can hit those criteria that they're looking for. So when the interviewer is analyzing, or when the interviewer gives you some information to analyze, they're really looking for a couple of questions, which is the candidate kind of taking the data and driving it, I guess, towards a question that you've given them. So it's not just kind of like, are they analyzing for analyzing its sake, but are they driving it forward to answer a hypothesis that they have? And are they linking that data and those hypotheses, and they're trying to turn that into insight that is related to the original question being asked, so the objective. And I'll explain what that means a little bit later with my example. But it's basically, don't just do the math, like do the right math. The right math that is like the math that needs to explain the question you're trying to solve. And then through that, they're also looking for mannerisms. So again, is the candidate confident, and are they kind of opening their mind and for their interviewer to kind of see into their method and see how they think? And are they checking in with the interviewer at appropriate times to kind of make sure that they're not making any wrong assumptions, and that's a collaborative process with the interviewer. So might talk about a step-by-step process by which someone hands you how to kind of solve the data that you're handed. So typically what happens is you're going through your case or you're making your framework, is that the interviewer at some stage will say, yeah, that's a really interesting question to look into. What would you say if we kind of do this analysis and get this data, right? And they'll hand you this kind of graph or a table with a whole bunch of data on it. So what should you do at that stage? And the first thing you should do, like when they start giving you the question, is you should take some time to think, right? Don't kind of let the word vomit just come out of your mouth. Think about what the question is you're trying to solve, and think about, what information that you're being given right now. So look at the graph, 10 to 15 seconds, maybe make a noise or like rub your chin to kind of let them know you're thinking about it. But just look at the graph at a high level, right? Look at stuff like the title. Look at stuff like the X and Y axis labels. So like, time maybe, or dollars. Look at the legend. So like, what are the different colors, if it's a kind of different colored bar graph, represent. And also like pay attention to the units on the X and Y axes, but basically just kind of get a glance of what the frame of the graph is. Maybe not like the data inside, but like what is the frame of the graph. So what is the graph showing? Even if there was no data on it yet, or the boxes are smaller or bigger, the axes labels are going to be the same. So it's like, what is this showing? Is this showing profit over time? Is this showing number of customers over time? Is this showing number of customers at a single point in time across different geographies? So just read that at the highest level, right? And then actually start replaying that to your interviewer. So, as I've said, there's all these things you think about. It should only take you 10 or 15 seconds. And you should say to your interviewer and start talking through what you think the graph is showing. You say, okay, well, it looks like you've given me a graph of profit over time, for example, and you start talking through it. After you've kind of, summarized to the interviewer, okay, I understand the broad scope of the information you've given me. Now let me look for insight in it. That's when you start to actually do the analysis. You should start to scan kind of methodically left to right, top to bottom, across basically all the axes and legends that they've given you, looking for any kind of anomalies. So if you had paper and a pen, you should actually kind of be circling the anomalies that you're finding, as well as talking through it. So again, I'll kind of do it in a work example just next. But finally, you want to relate all those anomalies. As looking for the anomalies is only one part of the analysis. That's kind of identifying any leads. But the next thing you need to do with those anomalies is you need to think, how do they actually answer my objective? Because not all of them are going to be relevant. Some of them are just going to be like, oh, that's interesting mathematical anomaly, but it's got nothing to do with the key question I'm trying to answer. You might get a revenue question, and there might be some interesting data about costs, but it's actually not relevant at all to your revenue question most of the time. So again, look for the anomalies, but use them as a starting point, but kind of really use your brain and think, okay, what question am I trying to solve, and relate them back to the question and generate insight. I think I've talked a little bit theoretically about it, but maybe it'll become a bit clearer with a kind of real case example. So again, this is like a BCG case that we know has been given historically to kind of candidates with BCG. So if you've been following along with this Ace the Case series, you'd know that it's related to a dynamite manufacturer. So there's a dynamite manufacturer, and their profit and their profitability has been dropping over time. And previously, kind of, we established, it's probably due to some high fixed support costs for what are like kind of on a revenue basis relatively smaller smaller customers. But we've dug a little bit further, and now the interviewers kind of handed this data and said, oh, look, we also kind of did some analysis and found some time series data. So they'll hand this to you. So if they did that, what would I start doing? First step, again, take some time to think. You say, okay, have a look. And in this time that I'm thinking, I would be analyzing the information given to me. So I'll be looking at the title, right? Exhibit 2, 2013 to 2015 financial breakdown. Okay, cool. So there's some time series data here between 2 different years. Interesting. And then more titles: volume, revenue, COGS, and support costs. Oh, interesting. These are all the elements of profit, basically, right? And then finally, kind of what's being shown here: years and quantum. So we're showing kind of units, dollars, dollars again, and dollars again. And then finally, some unit price information. And then what are the different colors? Oh, large, medium, small. Okay, so it's split by segment. So this is the point where I'd kind of, 10 to 15 seconds after looking at the graph and thinking about what I'm seeing, I'd talk back to the interviewer and I'd say, oh, okay, so I'm looking at this high-level information. I think what's shown here is volume, revenue, COGS, and support, which is basically all the elements of profit and profitability between 2013 and 15, so we can see how they've evolved. And it's also been split out by segments between large, medium, and small. The context is previously we'd established that this was a kind of profitability, but by segment kind of case. So we have all the information here, and I would say that back to the interviewer. I'd say, this is what I see. So now I'd like to, go deeper into the information and look for any insight that I could find in that information. And this is where I really begin to scan left to right. And I say, okay, interesting, left to right. Let's see what's going on in volume first. Between 2013 and 2015, you're seeing a big drop in volume. Interesting. Okay. Between volume and revenue, what have we got? We've got same shape. Okay. Well, that makes sense because they're kind of two drivers, right? Again, 2013 to 15, there's a drop. Looking left to right again, COGS, 2013 to 2015, it's gone up. That's strange. I would actually circle this as an anomaly as a drop, but I would also circle this COGS number as an anomaly, because why would COGS go up when volume drops? That's something interesting for us to kind of maybe investigate. But I'll keep going and I say, okay, well, support costs seem to be flat. All right, so those are the things I see at the high level, left to right. Now, it might be time to kind of look top to bottom a little bit and say, okay, well, I've got this legend, right? And there's kind of splitting things top to bottom. So what do I see in these changes left to right that can be split further top to bottom? So the volumes are dropping. Where are they dropping? Well, the volumes are dropping in the small segment the most, and then some growing a little bit in large, and dropping quite a bit again in the medium. And we see the same pattern in revenue. We see that revenue is really dropping a lot in the small, dropping a little bit from 400 to 200 in the medium, and dropping or growing by a little bit in large. So, again, we see some differences between small, medium, large, and we can kind of highlight those as anomalies as well. And now that we've kind of gone through these anomalies, let's say to the interviewer, okay, so I see some volume drops across different segments, small being bigger drops than large. And I see some increases in costs. And I want to see if those costs increases, whether there's any kind of difference among those segments. So I would look, okay, the costs went from 150 units costing $150 in 2013 to 25 units costing $50 in 2015. Meaning, okay, well, that's a 2x, right? That's a 2x increase. And I noticed that's happening in small. I'd go back and check, okay, medium, it's gone from $50, 50 units. It's gone from 100 units to costing $100 to 50 units costing $100. Meaning, again, there's a unit cost increase here. And then finally, I'd say, okay, well, 90 volume to get $90 in COGS, but now 100 volume is costing 200 in COGS. So it's kind of, what I see is that the unit prices are actually doubling. The unit costs are doubling, and that's actually true of all the segments. So, analyzing left to right, top to bottom, I've actually seen quite a few like anomalies or things that are changing nowadays. And I'd say this to the interviewer. But again, I'd say, okay, well, now let's relate this back to the question at hand, right? We've been asked to solve profitability or profit. And, we've drawn a driver tree about profit, and, it's got obviously elements of revenue and costs. So what's causing profit to drop? Well, which of these anomalies can explain that? I think one of the ones that can explain that is obviously volume drop, right? If you get a volume drop, you've got a revenue drop, you've got a revenue drop, you've got less revenue. Even if your unit costs are staying the same, you're going to be making less profit, right? So that's actually kind of insight one. We're having a loss in profit because we're getting a volume drop, and it's being driven by the small and medium segments and not enough being offset by the large. The second problem is obviously profitability is affected by costs, and our costs are actually rising. And again, our costs are rising because there's a across the board increase in unit costs across all the customer segments. So that's the second piece of insight that I would kind of take out of this graph. And I'd play those back as the insights relevant to our question to the interviewer. So in this way, I've been able to kind of follow a process of like, okay, you've given me some data. Okay, I show you that I know roughly what's in this data, or what kind of information is in this data. Okay, now I can read the actual data that you've given me and look for things that are interesting to talk about. And then 4, okay, I'm actually able to pick through the things that are interesting to talk about and tell you about which ones are relevant to the question at hand, right? So for example, you would have realized that during my analysis here, I didn't really talk about revenue changes, right? Because, you can notice here that there's no change in unit prices. It's being flat. So it's actually not really relevant to our question at hand. It's not explaining anything about a profitability drop. So I think that's an example of, how you would go through this process of receiving some data and then breaking it down slowly, taking some time to read it, taking some time to take the interviewer through your thoughts about what it shows at a high level before jumping deeper into what it shows on a kind of small mathematical quirk by quirk level before showing, okay, these quirks, which ones are the ones that hold the insight for the client. Some final tips that should kind of differentiate a good candidate from a great candidate is that, number one, not all the information on a graph matters, or not all the data given to you matters. In fact, it's quite common that an interviewer will give you more data that's necessary to kind of throw you off as a red herring. And this is basically because when you're working as a consultant, the client won't just give you the data that's insightful to your question. Sometimes they won't give you that much data at all, but more often than not, they'll basically open all their data to you. And, then you're kind of left with this, like, all this data from all these different points. So I think what the interviewer is testing usually is they're testing that you can follow a hypothesis, follow the structure that you've set out when you structured this whole question in the first place, to be able to determine which information on the graph actually matters to the key question the client's asking of you, versus what is kind of like interesting but not relevant to the current question at hand. And again, I'm talking about an example of, like, maybe talking about, costs of done X or Y in the data you've given me, but I'm doing like a revenue optimization case. So, I don't really need to think about that. So having the ability to apply your judgment and say, okay, even though I see there's a whole bunch of interesting things going on in this data, not all of it matters to the insight for the case. That's actually a skill that the interviewer is looking for. Number two to watch out for is sometimes the units can actually be set up to trick you. So in the example I just showed you, there isn't any of that kind of example. But what if, for example, the revenues were expressed as US dollars, and the costs were expressed as Australian dollars, because the manufacturing is done in Australia. That would be kind of a trick where you would probably have to remember that there's some kind of implied exchange rate between the two of them. Maybe it's like 90 cents to the dollar or something. So you have to kind of apply a transform to the information before you can begin to analyze it. Another kind of example could be that, like, costs are given per pair of units, because you're buying the units as pairs. So two at once. So they're saying, it's $5 for a pair of the unit costs, as opposed to, and you can sell them one by one for $10 each. If you're kind of a bit naive and you don't look at the units, you could say, that's 10 minus 5, you're making $5 profit per unit. But it's not true, because it's actually 10 minus 2.5, right? 5 divided by 2, because you're paying $5 for the pair. So again, check the units before they kind of trick you. Sometimes, for example, the units might be in thousands, right? And so you think something that's costing 250 is like off by an order of magnitude of 1,000, because you missed that the axis has a kind of a K on it, right? So dollars K or dollars thousands. And then finally, kind of like, always relate the analysis that you've done back to the key question. It's all too common that I've seen candidates who are quite strong mathematically, or even quite weak mathematically, but they kind of like find some mathematical insight, kind of just latch onto that and be like, yeah, I see this thing's going up by 20%. And it, that can count in your favor, but it will actually commonly count against you if you can't explain why that is actually relevant to the key question that the client's asked, right? It will make it seem like you're basically boiling the ocean and just grasping for straws about anything you can find in the data, as opposed to really thinking about how does that relate actually to the client's question, So always make sure that even though you're kind of starting by looking for anomalies, you're pretty quickly trying to sift through those anomalies and determine whether or not they're relevant or not to the key question. All right, so hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and enjoy the next one as well. Thanks.